tear, it falls and hits the ground. A tree, it falls without a sound. A bird, it calls and sends you home. A man, he sits in the cold all alone.
Hi, Brad. Thank you so much for joining me on the Joy of Sunflowers. Please introduce yourself a little bit more.
Well, thank you so much for having me. Incredibly honored to be a part of this conversation. My name is Brad Kogut. I happen to be the host of the Guys in Grief podcast. I host it with my brother-in-law, Brandon, and one of my best friends, Brian, two close friends of mine that we've all experienced loss. And certainly we can talk about, the podcast and our focus if it comes up. Personally, I live in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania with my beautiful wife, Jessica. We have our 4.5-year-old son, Ashton. He is an incredible and handsome little boy, joy of our life. We have a reoccurring pregnancy loss journey that spans 5 years. We have 3 early term miscarriages in the first trimester. Then Ashton was born and healthy. Followed by a 20-week termination for medical reasons. I'm certain we'll get into a lot of the details on that. And then a year struggle of IVF and, going through a lot of that journey to ultimately get pregnant with a healthy girl, Ariana, who we lost Beckham on November 19th, 2020. And we lost Ariana on November 18th, 2021, 364 days apart. And so we've gone through 5 losses in 5 years, and it's been a big part of our life, a big part of our challenge, our resiliency, and that's why I created the podcast to support other men that have been through pregnancy or infant loss, because there's not a whole lot out there for us as men. There's wonderfully a lot of resources like what you've created with Joy of Sunflowers and many other incredible events or podcasts or books and conferences, which is all phenomenal. The men in this are usually sort of a secondary part, and for obvious reasons because of the physical component, but the emotional component is very much there for us as well. And so I've been through that loss journey and that heartbreak time and again over 5 years. And I wanted to create a platform for other men to be able to talk about that and to support one another. So, I'm grateful for being a part of this, and thank you for anything that you want to talk about, I'm here for it.
Right. Yeah. Seriously, thank you for what you do, because it's so true. And I didn't really know much about the male space in the loss space. And really opened my eyes, because I felt like there wasn't even enough for women. And, we have a lot compared to what
Sure.
men. There's so much support. There's so many groups. And once you enter the space, that everything's opened up to you in terms of that, as a woman. And I think it's so wonderful that you started that podcast, because I do actually redirect people to you.
Thank you.
Because they sort of mention that their partner's going through it, and there really isn't anywhere for them to go. And so, thank you, because you're actually a place that I can say, hey, here's a link that he can go onto and listen to other guys who have gone through this.
Absolutely. The interesting fun fact for you too, though, Ella, is over half of our listeners are actually female. And so we've just, as of today recording, we've released 12 episodes. We just started in January. We release every Wednesday. Recording another episode tonight, which is going to be unbelievable, where we talk about inequities in social justice and race and loss. So really, really powerful episode. But we get a lot of the analytics on the back end, and over half of our listeners are female. And a lot of the outreach that we get through Instagram, Facebook, direct to our email is actually women saying, thank you for doing this and all the wonderful platitudes, but it's helping me to understand my guy and what he's going through and why he's not talking to me about this, or why he's angry, or why he's grieving the way that he is. And we have literally one couple that emails us every week on Wednesday evening. We release on Wednesdays. They listen to it separately, and then they talk about it at dinner like it's couples therapy.
Oh, that's
and it's just never in a million years did I think we would be making that type of impact. So I just think it's a really interesting added benefit where we very narrowly created this for men because, we don't have much of this in the space. But it's awesome to see the impact that it's having on women as well to better navigate their relationships with their spouse. So we're really proud of that as well.
Yeah, and you should be, honestly. I mean, that's a large part of why I wanted to do it as well. Because my husband didn't really connect with the pregnancy at all. Like, he was very honest with me, and he was like, I don't really feel it. Like, I don't want you to be suffering, but for some reason, I'm just not connecting. I want to. Like, I wish I was connecting with it. I wish that I was with you, but I just literally I can't. Like, I just don't connect. And for me, I was just like, do men feel this at all?
I get it. I was that way with some of our early miscarriages, and by no means downplaying the impact of those. Those were incredibly difficult, but the difficulty was more seeing my wife going through it.
That's what
And
yeah.
Right, being the support system to her and seeing, her heartbreak and what her body had to go through in those moments. And this was before we had Ashton, so we were just trying and failing and thinking, maybe there were some challenges here that maybe we'll never have a family. That was super difficult for me. But I agree with your husband. Like, I didn't actually feel a connection to, because my wife, you don't know her, but she's 100 pounds soaking wet. She is, skinny little beautiful thing. And so I'd say that because normally, like, 10 weeks or so, she's showing. And by like 12, 13 weeks, we can pick up heart rate on a fetal Doppler. And so the earlier losses that we had, those things weren't happening. So as a guy, I couldn't, she didn't have a baby bump. I couldn't feel, a kick or anything along those lines. Our life hadn't changed to the point of where, we're picking out a nursery or talking names or, doing that type of stuff. So I can connect with that component where your husband was feeling that, because I was in a similar vein. Where I struggled with connecting with those pregnancies, and certainly in comparison to the later term losses that we had.
Yeah, I actually tried to explain that to him. I was like, it could be this because, we really just didn't see anything. It was before 7 weeks. We never saw a baby. We never saw a heartbeat or anything like that. So I said to him, I think it's just because it's just so early and you don't have that connection. Like, I have the body connection, but you don't have anything. You don't, like, there's nothing to envision. There's nothing to see. But yeah, I think it was really difficult for him in that moment because he was just like, well, if I should feel something, and I don't. But yeah, I think he'll like hearing that because he was just, yeah, I think he'll enjoy that, maybe he's not actually
not alone,
alone in it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'll tell him. I think it'll make him feel better. But
good.
Yeah, it's horrible that that makes us feel better, like we're not alone.
Oh, you totally
to go through it, but
we say stuff like that on the podcast all the time. We're like, we never know the right adjectives. We're like, oh, we're excited for this episode to talk about infant. Like, that sounds terrible. Right? Like, we don't know the right words to use sometimes.
Yeah.
But I think then we kind of chalk it up to like, all of it is messy. Like, there's no playbook. We literally have one whole episode that's entitled Nobody Prepares You For. And we just talk about 9 different topics that nobody could have ever prepared us for unless you've gone through this and you're in the moment or post. And so I think the reality is, any emotion's the right emotion. And maybe, you cope through it, you manage through it. But there's no blueprint to how we should react because it's all uncharted and it's all messy.
Yeah. I mean, I'm pregnant right now. I'm 27.
Congrats.
Thank you. And I said to my husband, like, we laughed about this, and I don't think it's normal, but like you said, your reaction is your reaction. And he was like, oh, if we lost it, like, what would happen? And I'm like, well, it would be, either a stillborn or, it would die sort of soon. And I said, I'd put it in the freezer. He was like, okay. We should do that. I don't want to have it in the freezer. And we just sort of laughed at it for like, I don't know, 5 minutes.
But even the fact that he asks that question, like people that haven't been through loss don't ask what
No.
happens if we lose this child, right? Like, and
Mm.
when we went through especially our last loss with Ariana, that question ran through my mind daily, multiple times a day, you know, and that's ultimately why we've stopped our journey. You know, it's 5 years and a lot of loss is a lot to put my wife's body through, our son Ashton through, ourselves through, our wallets through with IVF, which if you told me it cost $50,000 and somebody would hand me a baby, not that I got 50K to throw around, but I would make it work. It's not about the money, but it's about the mental and emotional turmoil that we've been through. But we've struggled with that every single day. And it's just fascinating that as a lost parent, it's interesting that he says that too, because even though we didn't necessarily connect on the earlier one, I think you got an open window to the fact that he's impacted by it in some way, shape, or form, because he's thinking about it in a way that most men or most people, if you haven't experienced a loss, you're probably not thinking, well, what would happen if we do lose this child? Most people just think, I'm going to have a baby and I got to prepare myself for 40 weeks from now.
Yeah, and I've even had moments where he's sort of said to me, you know, I have to be okay regardless. Like he said that. He said, I have to be okay regardless. And I was like, well, if you need to, like, if you do feel something, like if we lose this one and you do feel something, I was like, you know, you do need to express it in some way. Like you have to let it
Sure.
out, you know. And he was just like, well, we still need to live in a house and we still need to. And I think that's one of the things as well. Like it can be a barrier. And if you've got really amazing mechanisms like in your subconscious to like protect you from all of that, then it will do its thing. And maybe you'll feel like numb and you won't feel like you feel anything. And maybe later down the track or something, it will sort of come up on you. But I said to him, you know, you've seen the baby, you've seen the heartbeat, you've seen things, you know, and we've talked about what this baby would be like alive, you know, so
Sure.
you probably will feel it, you know, and that's okay. But yeah,
But we're not going to put that into the world. But you're going to have 13 weeks from now, you're going to have an unbelievable, healthy baby. And we're excited for that.
Well, I hope so. I hope so. This
Yes.
is the furthest we've been in loss, but yeah, it's amazing once you've had loss. It's a if, not a when.
Yeah.
And it just becomes that, and I'm sure you get that and you understand that.
Completely.
So let's dive in from the very beginning of your journey. Did you always know you wanted to be a dad, or was it something that you sort of came to?
I always knew once I met my wife, Jessica. And that's an honest statement. Like I'm a very loving guy. I've got wonderful young ones in our family that I've always been close with, and a ton of volunteer work with children. I've always loved being around kids. I thought I wanted to be a dad, but it was never like by 30, I need to be on that journey type of thing. That just never triggered. And I met Jessica in my later 20s. We were living in New York City at the time when we met. And I should also level set, rewind a little bit here. Like I'm an HR executive. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not a grief counselor. I don't host a podcast from a position of expertise. I host it just as another dad creating a platform. And that a lot of that goes into like the thought of child planning and, what our life's going to look like 10 years from now. Never really crossed my mind originally. Just more of the fact that like, yeah, if I have kids, that'd be wonderful. And then when Jessica and I started dating and then engaged and married, we actually moved out of New York City to Connecticut to start to raise a family, because we knew for us raising a kid in Manhattan would be a nightmare. It was already as expensive enough. Our 1-bedroom, 600 square foot apartment was $4,000 a month. And like, where are we going to fit anything else for a child? And, just all the things that you have for a child. So we moved to Connecticut, where I lived previously, to start to raise a family. So kind of in that earlier, engaged to married phase, that conversation started to come up. Only once we got married did, the actual thought process of, all right, let's start trying, become a thing. But yeah, it was sometime in, I guess in my early 30s, if you will.
Yeah, beautiful. It's a similar I've heard a similar story like with some of the ladies I've talked to, and they're just like, yeah, I saw him and I was like, yes.
I should go grab my wife and see if that would be her answer too.
Yeah, I was like, she was like, "Don't tell my husband." I'm like, "Well,
yeah. Well, it's recorded, so
yeah,
yeah.
this is gonna be on the site, so he might see it." She's like, "Yeah,
Hilarious.
he'll probably get a big head," and I'm like, "Okay, we can enjoy that. Why not?"
Yeah, exactly. They can feel good.
So, from then, so from marriage, how did you guys move into trying?
Yeah, so sort of natural, next step in our journey together was we got married. Now let's start a family. And so, no hesitation in trying, no issues in getting pregnant. Our issues have always been staying pregnant. In 6 years or in 5 years, Jessica's been pregnant 6 times. We've lost 5 of those, but getting pregnant was not the challenge. And as I mentioned to you before, some of those things too, with the earlier ones, we didn't know if there was a medical reason or, people unfortunately lose, early pregnancies. It can be a false reading on a pregnancy test or for a myriad of reasons. And so the first couple were, we're going through with the doctors, and, unfortunately Jessica had to do a couple DNCs earlier on in that process as well. So that was an emotional toll as well. And that delays, trying again. So we were kind of in this journey for a while, and then we got pregnant with Ash, and he was born September 2nd, 2018. Healthy baby boy, no issues along, some things that the doctors freak out about and that end up being nothing. Thanks, doc. But he's healthy and perfect, and he's an awesome kid. And so we want to keep trying. And we start down that pathway again, and we get pregnant with our son Beckham, our first mid to late term loss. And I'll try to make this story a little bit shorter because it's very, very, all of this is very long. And if anybody wants to know the full details, come to the Guys in Grief podcast. I tell the whole damn thing.
We'll link it below as well.
Oh, that'd be wonderful. Thank you so much. About 12 weeks into pregnancy, we found out that Beckham had tested positive for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And without, the whole medical expertise or, the all the details for this purpose, Duchenne is a very, very life-limiting and ultimately life-ending disease. But life expectancy really max 30, many, very earlier than that. At 3 years old is really where a lot of the life-limiting impact on muscle contractions, starting in the legs, then up into the heart and breathing. And it's a terrible, terrible, terrible disease. And so Jessica tests positive for it at 12 weeks. But we didn't know if he had it or not. We had to wait for the results of that testing. We said, hang on, we have Ashton. He's a healthy baby boy. We did all the same testing, 18 months ago. But of course, the panel of what they tested 18 months ago was very different or less inclusive of diseases. They're adding things more and more as they get smarter and they can test. Makes sense, right? That's, part of the medical community. And they tell us, so basically, because of it being a chromosomal issue on Jessica's side, there's a 50-50 chance that Beckham would have muscular dystrophy. Toss a coin. And they said, yeah, you actually need to bring Ashton in too, because there's a 50% chance that he has it, our living son. And we're freaking out. And we said, like, what do you mean? He's like, I'm watching this kid run around on the beach, literally at that moment in time. And like, well, he really wouldn't start to present until he's 3. And he was like weeks away from turning 3. And so our whole life is turned upside down. For fast forward, Ashton is perfect and healthy. He is, thank by the grace of God, does not have muscular dystrophy. But it took us 4 weeks to get the results for Ashton. And so for a month, we're not only thinking about the impact of Beckham, the pregnancy, but also our living child and what this would do for our lives. We get the results of Ashton, thank God, a little bit of fresh air, we could take a breath finally. And then Jessica and I talked to we did all the research we possibly could on muscular dystrophy. We talked to the leading experts in the world. We were actually living in Connecticut at the time, and the top doctor on Duchenne muscular dystrophy is up the road in Yale, in Connecticut. This is COVID times, so it's not like we could just drive up the road and go and talk to the doctor, but we had a great call, and we learned everything that we could about DMD. And to kind of cut to the chase here, from all the conversations that we had, including that doctor, the big takeaway that Jessica and I had was not one of these experts, not one of these doctors, our own doctors or anybody else, was advocating for the life of our child. They were saying, there will be good days, but there's one thing that's guaranteed is every tomorrow will be harder than today. There will be, countless doctors right from the second he is born. His entire life will be filled with challenges and pain, and that will only get harder over time. There is no cure. There is no medicine. There's really very, very little that can be done to even make it copable. And so we struggled for weeks and weeks, and, what are we going to do? I mean, there was days that I woke up and I'm like, I'm going to be the president of the Duchenne Muscular Dystrophy Society. Like, whoever you are, move over. Like, I'm coming in, I'm taking over. We are going to build a ranch home, because at 3, they end up in a wheelchair. Typically children with DMD, by 6 or 7, we'll build a ranch where it's wheelchair accessible. We will uproot our lives to do this. And I think an important point, disability does not scare Jessica or myself. We've done a ton of work with children in this space. And it was not about disability. It was about the life, and the very painful and difficult one that Beckham was undoubtedly going to live. So fast forward to week 20, we get the call from a doctor that he indeed does have Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And we made the very difficult decision that we terminated for medical reasons with Beckham. We birthed Beckham. We went to the hospital, and as I said, on November 19th, 2020, I'll actually show you, I've got that date tattooed on my forearm here, as a reminder of Beckham every single day. There you are, right on my forearm. We birthed him. We met him. We read books to him. We swaddled him. We took pictures. We did everything that you do when you birth a child. But it was a decision that we still stand very steadfast on. And I'm skipping over some of both the logistical details and the emotional details just for semblance of time here. But it was the most difficult decision of our entire life, and one that we still feel very resolute that it was the right decision, because of the life that he was going to live. And so we get through that, and we take some time. And because of the chromosomal issues, we knew that really our only option to continue to try to raise our family was through IVF, to go as sort of scientifically assisted through this process. And essentially the best way for us to not go down that pathway was to have a girl, because it can pass to a daughter, but it doesn't present in a daughter. So we would find ourselves in a not that 50-50 coin toss. And so we go through IVF, a couple failed cycles. One of them that was actually ruined by a false COVID test on our last day of our cycle. So that was a whole nightmare. And we get 3 embryos, which is not a lot at the end of the process. And we get pregnant with a girl. And we're like, this is divine, like finally some light and positivity shining in our direction. And we are moving from Connecticut to Pennsylvania. We're living with my in-laws in Ohio for a handful of weeks while our house is being finalized. We were building a home to get closer to family after going through all this loss. And I was in work in Jersey. And at 14 weeks, Jessica Ashton wanted to hear the baby on the Doppler, because as I mentioned, she's really small. It was able to hear very early on, and it wasn't coming up. And so the next morning, Jessica went, her father drove her to Pittsburgh Hospital. And long story short, there was no heartbeat. And literally the next day, we were staying at a hotel room to have a day away for Jessica and I to just focus on Beckham and be in our emotions and honor him as the 1-year anniversary. And the day before that 1 year anniversary, we found out that we lost Ariana at 14 weeks. And so our life completely turned upside down once again. And, our faith is just shattered, and, our hearts and our emotions. And we're going through all this while in transition of homes and living with my in-laws, and come to sort of the final decision that we can't continue to put ourselves through this, emotionally, physically, financially, as I mentioned earlier. And again, the money is not a big part, but we were finding ourselves trying and failing so many times that we decided to put our energy into what we do have, which is an incredible little boy in Ashton. And so that's our story.
Yeah. Wow. I think as well, like when you have a living child and they need you, and you can't keep living in that emotional turmoil like forever. There is a real hard limit to how much energy you can expend in every
Yeah.
direction. Like I've
I mean, you're
got
totally. No, go
yeah.
ahead.
Oh, yeah, like I have 3 kids, and like the losses, the first one killed me. Like it was so bad. Like I was in a pit of depression for like 2 months.
Yeah.
That's how long everything took to kind of work whatever was going on, because I did everything naturally. And yeah, it just it really threw me. And my husband was like,
Yeah.
I need you back. I need you because the kids need you, and you can't
Yeah.
be in this anymore. And I was just like, I know. And when it's time. We had 2 losses in 1 year, and I said to him, I was like, if we lose this one, I'm done. Like, I can't do more babies. Like,
Yeah.
because
I
I know
agree.
this is going to break me. Like,
Exactly right. And you're so right too about, we talk a lot on the pod about the impact of our living children and helping us navigate and cope. And I remember after coming home from the hospital, we were there for 3 days post Beckham because just all the challenges and everything like that. And my in-laws are at the house, and this is in September. I'm sorry, November. Ashton was born in September. This is in November, and we're, sort of leaves falling all over the place. We have a huge pile of leaves, and I leave the hospital, and the worst day of my life by far. Add up every other bad day I've ever had, still less than this one. And we come home from the hospital, and Ashton's outside with my father-in-law playing in this huge pile of leaves, the happiest he's ever been. And in that moment, it was, I got to go be dad, right? Like, let me just go be dad for Ashton. And maybe there's a catharsis in that for me too, of I can just be his dad in this moment. I want to be Beckham's dad too. But right now, Ashton needs his dad, and let's just go play in some leaves for a while. And that was challenging because a lot of times you were swallowing it down and trying to figure out, especially as the man too, because you're being that protector. You want to be that person that keeps your family uplifted and moving forward while your wife is grieving. And so stepping in some of those moments are super difficult. But there's also a beauty in that, of the impact of a living children. And I will never forget playing in the leaves with Ashton like that. It's even to this day when, playing in leaf piles, it brings me back to that day.
No, it's so surreal with kids as well. And they say things and they do things, that really just, you're like, wow. Like my son, he said to me before, I know you're really sad about the babies, but you still have us. And I was like, I know. And I said, I love you so much. And I'm so grateful for you guys. I'm just also sad about the babies because I wish I had them as well. Like I want all of us to be together. So it's just, yeah, some of the things that they come out with. And my son named our first loss, and he named her. Well, we decided it was a her because we don't know.
Sure.
He named her Joy. And I said, why? I was so confused. And he looked at me
Mm.
like, you should know this, mum, and he was like, because the baby would be joyful in heaven with Jesus. And I was like,
Incredible.
but
Incredible.
kids are amazing. They say things and
Yeah.
like, wow, like
And it's such a, they grow up faster. This is still a 4-year-old doing 4-year-old things. But what my son already understands about loss and heaven, and we pray about Beckham and Ari every day. We have Beckham's ashes in our living room in this beautiful like lit display. It's kind of hard to explain. I can maybe send a picture of it. And he talks about Beckham all the time, but in a most beautiful, loving way. He'll ask questions of things that he doesn't understand at times. And especially we moved to this amazing neighborhood here in Pittsburgh, kids everywhere. Literally 3 weeks ago, somebody just had a baby. Another one's due 3 weeks from now. There's just kids sprouting up all over the place. And it's amazing. It's why we moved here, because we wanted him to have this community. But he's also talked about, he said to us, I want a baby sister. And he sees all of his friends in his neighborhood with all of their siblings, and it's incredibly difficult. But isn't there something beautiful in there too? Of like they learn some of these things and the coping mechanisms and the strength that they just sort of get through osmosis of all of this. That, I mean, I didn't even think about loss like this until I was in it in my 30s. My son at 3 years old was learning about loss in a way that was appropriate for a 3-year-old, right? Where obviously we weren't sharing details. And there's parts, our termination for medical reasons is clearly not a conversation that we're having with Ashton at 4.5 years old, but one day we will. And certainly it won't be in his 30s. And there's something, sort of powerful in what we get to teach our children through all of this.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I know a lot of people, are very worried about teaching their kids and telling their kids about loss. But yeah, I've found nothing but yeah, that growth and that kind of understanding. And I do think it's really important for them to go through that. If that is part of their journey, part of what's happened in their family.
Yeah.
And
here's the fact.
An elephant in the room.
Yeah. This is our lives for the rest of our lives, period. Right? Like, unless nobody that's going to watch this video is unfazed by the loss that they've been through, or else they're not spending time watching this video, right? Like, this is the norm for every day for the rest of your life. And educating your children on it, I realize the challenge of it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not mitigating, those difficulties in conversations and the comprehension of a child, especially at a very young age. Mm-hmm. But if this is your life, and you want to also celebrate your children, what I've found is, and my niece, who, as I mentioned, my brother-in-law, Brandon, him and my sister lost a daughter at 36 weeks to a cord accident. And our living niece, Gabby, talks about Story, who they lost, like they're best friends. I literally, she talks about Story's favorite color, and that Story's tickling her, and what Story wants to do for vacation, and what her favorite Disney movie or song is. They don't talk about it in a morbid way. They talk it about in the beautiful way that we wish people in our lives would talk to us about. Like, I wish my best friends would even talk to me about the losses that we have, let alone talk about it in a way like my son or my niece do. And so there's something super powerful and beautiful in that. And it is the life that we have been given. And so you can choose to, it's like a lot of things, like triggers and signs. And I haven't been the one that's necessarily embraced the signs that come my way. But we had a guest on recently that's talked about it, and it was like, the reality is you can either choose to embrace them or not. But, there's a power in embracing them and recognizing that those are moments that your child's talking to you. And isn't there something beautiful in turning your eye towards it as opposed to turning your eye away from it? And so I encourage anybody that's struggling with that to embrace it, because there's no getting away from this. And I think you'll find a lot more beauty and power in it than anything that will be difficult to navigate.
Yeah. Yeah, so true. And I mean, my kids have said something that was just like, oh, like, I want to cry.
Yeah.
But I think, yeah, there's real power in that, and them seeing us get really upset about losing a baby, they're seeing the importance. They're seeing how much
Good point.
we love them and how important they are, and how, you know, how it doesn't matter how early it was, or, you know, it was a baby, and you're sad, and it, you know, you've really lost something, and they're seeing that it's real and that it's a thing. And I think that teaches a lot.
Yeah, agreed.
It's sad that they have to know that, but it's also really beautiful that they do and can understand it. And hopefully they won't be as fearful, and if something does happen to them in their lives, you know, God forbid, hopefully it doesn't, but they'll be better able to deal with whatever they come across in terms of loss.
Yeah,
Um,
good point.
yeah, I've heard people have said, you know, their families went through loss and they coped better because of it. So it's definitely
Agreed.
so I just want to talk about like how you got through the emotional side of things. I know you guys have sort of closed that door, and I know a lot of people find it really hard to close that door. But when you know, like
Yeah.
that door needs to get closed, you know. So yeah, how was the emotional journey from sort of the losses into that closing the door moment?
So full transparency, I had brought up closing the door after Beckham, after, you know, that 20 weeks, because that difficulty was unbearable, and how it changed and impacted our lives was just, I knew I couldn't go through that again. And the fear of going through that again was so palpable for us. But we knew we wanted to grow our family. And so we, you know, picked ourselves up and dusted ourselves off and said, let's keep going. And my biggest fear, I've said this many, many times, and Jessica heard me say it a million times, was my biggest fear in continuing to try, especially doing IVF, was to do all of this, to put our body through this, to do all this investment and the financial component and all that type of stuff, and end up empty handed. That we're going to expose ourselves again, the most raw and vulnerable part of our lives. We're going to put ourselves out there for that to potentially happen again. And what if it does? Like, that was so scary to me. And as I've just laid out, it's exactly what happened. And the messed up part about it all was Ari was perfect. There was nothing on the doctor's scans. There was no issues. There was no Duchenne muscular dystrophy. There was nothing. Until this day, we have no answers of why we lost her at 14 weeks, which made it even harder. You know, there was nothing that caused this. And so it made us start to think, you know, are we cursed? Do we do something? Is this, you know, because of the decision that we made to terminate, is this a ramification of that, you know, God is putting on us? Like, there's so much on this. And so, true fact, we are driving home from Pittsburgh Hospital after having the DNC with Ari. And we made the decision on that car ride home that this was the end of our journey. We'd been talking about it for a year, obviously, when we originally thought, when that was a conversation with Beckham. And I remember saying to Jessica, and frankly, and she would admit this too, like, if we didn't have that conversation, she would have wanted to keep going, because how much she wants to grow our family and how much we both do. But also, as her husband, I couldn't fathom watching her go through anything like that again, let alone going through it myself. And so that was not a like, yep, we're done. Yeah, it was not that easy of a, you know, 40-minute car ride of a decision. This was 365 days of conversation leading up to that moment in time. And the fact that we were in this again, and the worst possible scenario of ending empty-handed and all of this happened again, it felt like the only answer that we had. And, you know, we're at this point, you know, in our late 30s. We're not spring chickens where this is easy. And, you know, we have to do IVF because of chromosomal issues. Like, there's a lot of headwinds for us to even get pregnant again, let alone have a viable pregnancy that we see through to birth and have a living child. So the emotion piece of all of that was just as hard as the losses. because making that decision that we're not going to grow our family when literally for 5 years we have tried to continuously grow our family, and so blessed and grateful for what we have in Ashton. But that doesn't mean that we didn't want more children. Like, we've been at this, we've only been married for 7, right? Like, we've been at this for 5 years. And sorry, she's calling me. And so the emotional piece, I think that just exacerbated the emotion that we were in of losing Ari. That, we went through this again. Ari was completely healthy. There was no reason, the insult to injury of being 364 days apart. And then the magnitude of us saying, this is where our journey ends. The compound impact of all of those realities and decisions led to, some really, really dark times in our life. And, I don't have to tell you the divorce rate statistics and, the challenges of families post loss. And, fortunately we were never and will never be close to any of those types of statistics. We're incredibly strong. We love each other, unequivocally. But it doesn't mean that the times were easy. Like, we were living with our in-laws and we were moving to a city where we knew nobody. It was still COVID. Like, life was just, but life was fucked. Like, everything, it was so hard. Like, yeah, I have a great job. I have a wonderful job. Great. Jessica can be a stay-at-home mom because I have a great job. Great. We have this unbelievable son. Amazing. But like, none of that was it was literally staring us in the face, but we couldn't see any of that. All we could see was all these challenges that were surmounting around us and the emotion that was cascading because of it. And it took a long time in therapy and support and, expanding. And frankly, a lot of that for me was creating this podcast. And it took a while. Like, it was over a year later when even the idea to create the podcast came about. I literally came up with the idea in November, almost another 365 days post Ari. But it was a recognition that I've got to do something with all of this that's built inside of me, all of this grief and all of this anger, and the fact that I don't have anywhere else to put it. I don't have, men that I can talk to or resources. And there's the, wonderful things out there. Our therapists in our nonprofit, Emma's Footprints, is unbelievable. But as a man, I didn't have the outlets that I felt I really needed. And so this is still a journey. This was a car ride decision that a year and a half later is still a part of our daily lives.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's the case with, with loss in general. Like, we're like, oh, well, we'll feel better after this. And it just, there isn't that. Like, we're gonna experience this. And I like how you didn't say new normal when you were speaking before. Like, you have to stop yourself. Like, the COVID rhetoric just like goes.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
I'm like, I don't want to say new normal. I don't want to do normal.
Agreed.
So yeah, I totally get it. And it really is like, you have to embrace the new the new person you've become. That's something I regularly ask the women, but I haven't actually asked the men yet. Like, how have you dealt with the changes in yourself?
Ooh, good question. There's positive coping mechanisms and there's negative ones. And I can't say I've only chosen the positive ones. Right. I've tried to do more and more of that. And I think a big one for me was the creation of the podcast. Clearly, because I get to talk about my children every single week. I get to say their names. I get to tell a portion of their stories, and enable, I am by nature a fixer. Somebody that wants to help and lean in. And I know I drive my wife bananas with that all the time, especially in this space, right? Where like, you can't just fix grief. You can't just say some magic words that are like, oh yeah, I feel completely better now about my lost child. And like, that just doesn't exist. And as guys, we don't wrap our heads around that. We don't wrap our heads around a lot of things when it comes to women, let alone how we grieve differently. And so I realized I was trying to help her through her stuff while not dealing with my own shit. And I really needed to start to turn inward and figure out why I feel the way that I feel, why I'm acting or reacting. And I don't know, not in your own personal lives too, but I'm sure a lot of people you talk to, we found we would have the most mundane arguments that would be just absolute explosions. Yeah, you forgot to pick up the mac and cheese, or the you didn't take out the trash, or something just so dumb, but became these monstrosity of moments. And because we weren't, me particularly, weren't was not dealing with the emotion and the anger and the grief that I was feeling. I was just suppressing it. And the reality, a lot of what we hear from men on the pod too, and certainly resonates for me, is what I've said before, and Jessica's not going to hear this for the first time, is if she was grieving every waking hour of the day, except for 1 hour of the day, why am I going to take that 1 hour and say, all right, my turn, right now it's all about, and then just have every hour of the day being, sad and grieving? As men, we don't put ourselves into that position because we don't want our spouse to continuously feel that grief. And so, I've, between, working out, and I've done the daily workout that was 11, 19, 20 in November 19th, 2020, as a remembrance of Beckham. I don't do it every day anymore. But I did for a solid year post Beckham. But also just getting myself comfortable talking about loss, talking about termination for medical reasons, knowing that this is our journey and this is our children's story. I felt like I was harboring more guilt and more heaviness when I didn't talk about it, because I was living in a world where my actions seemed like they never existed, like my children never existed, because I wouldn't talk about them. I wouldn't grieve them out loud. And when I did, it was an explosion of emotion. And so the more I found that I make those conversations a part of, maybe not daily life, I don't necessarily talk about this at work because it's not always appropriate. And, meeting new people, it's not like, I struggle with the question, how many kids do you have? I struggle with that every single day. It's like, how much time do you got? All right. Like, how much do you want to get into it? And so I struggle with those types of things all the time. But I'm in a better place because I am consciously embracing what we've gone through, and consciously wanting to honor our children. And so I think the more I've been able to get comfortable with that, the more I've been able to manage through the emotion and cope. I don't know if I answered your question directly, but hopefully it was.
Yeah, no, you did. You
helpful.
did. Yeah, and I mean, just coming off that, you said about like when people ask you how many kids you have, like that's something that, I mean, as like women, often we talk about it. So, how do you approach that question? What runs through your mind, and what do you usually answer?
Yeah, I think my one thing that I've heard from a lot of men that I think is something that I'm starting to try to embrace more is, I have one child at home, and let people take the rest. The at home is clearly an implication. There's a reason that you're saying that, but I don't need to go into, well, over the past 5 years, ... But I also, what seems to work for me is contextualization. If I'm an HR executive for a Fortune 500 real estate company, if I'm on a call with a vendor who's trying to sling me some new technology, and they see the picture of ice skates of me and my son behind me, and they say, oh, how many kids do you have? In my mind, I'm going to talk to this person for 30 minutes and I may never talk to them again. I contextualize that because I don't want to get into it. And I don't want that. I don't have that relationship with you, vendor, to just start to open up all my personal life shit. So in those moments, I find myself saying, we have our son, Ashton. If it's somebody that I'm going to get to know more, or I see being a part of our life, that's where embracing that language of, we have one at home, and, maybe starting to say, like, we've gone through a long journey of trying to grow our family and have had, multiple losses along the way, that I've started to embrace and saying that more. And then people, we moved to this neighborhood, and it's like I said, there's just kids everywhere. It's unbelievable. Like, we hosted the Christmas party and there was 27 children in our house, and they're all like between like 3 and 6. It's insane. these people were like, these are new neighbors. We're going to spend a lot of time together. We're telling them right away. Like, it wasn't like, hi, we're Brad and Jessica. Here's our whole story. But like early parts of these, you want to know who we are. We want to actually talk and, hear our journey. We've brought that out in early conversations with people. And so I think for me, the big pieces of, and I don't know if this is being a man or not, I think for me personally, is just contextualization of, I don't feel like I'm dishonoring my children in every instance. If it's that vendor example, or, somebody at the grocery store and the cashier, like, oh, he's so cute. Do you have any more? Like, I'm not getting into that with Betty at the cash register. I'm sure she's nice, but I don't need that. Um, but if it's somebody where it feels appropriate, with sort of my own discretion in that, that's where I'll embrace a different response.
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. I had a few ladies sort of say, not everyone deserves to hear your story. And it might just be
interesting
that
point.
it's not the right time for them to hear it, and I was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense, because you get into that kind of like, yeah, what do I say? Like,
Right. That means a lot to me, actually, though. Like, not everybody deserves to hear that or needs to hear the story. Like, because I struggle with that sometimes of like, did I just dishonor my children? Did I not recognize them by not speaking to them in that moment? And I struggle with that all the time. But hearing that response is, it kind of makes me feel a little better in those moments. Like, it's not always necessary, and not everybody needs to hear it or deserves to hear it, and that's okay.
And I mean, my added part to that was, not everyone's ready to hear that.
Totally.
Maybe they're not in that, right space. And if you had said something, maybe they would have said something back that was not helpful.
Triggering. Yeah.
Yeah. Before we wrap it up, like, what has been probably the most unhelpful thing that you've been, like, that someone said to you, followed by the most helpful thing that someone said to you?
Ooh. You would think I would have a better answer to this, or like a ready answer, considering I host a podcast on this stuff. But it's usually the questions that I ask people.
Yeah.
One thing that I talked about in the one episode, the Nobody Prepares You For, is, so it's maybe not so much a said as it is a reaction, is that people will write off your pregnancy losses like they don't matter as much, especially early pregnancy losses. Like, oh, just try again and, get back in there. And like, do you know I've tried for 5 years, and the whole, the emotion and the turmoil and everything we've been through, like, it's not that simple, unfortunately, to just recreate life. And sort of the minimalization of pregnancy loss, especially, first and second trimester pregnancy loss, where people are just like, oh, well, at least it wasn't a living child. And, sometimes I've been in scenarios where, one of my co-hosts of the podcast lost his son, Austin. Brian lost Austin at 6 weeks old to SIDS. And sometimes I feel like in scenarios where, like, am I as qualified to host this podcast? Not that there's qualifications, but like, is my loss as impactful as Brian's loss in losing Austin? And the fact that that question even has to cross my mind, or that people will make me feel that way, is so infuriating. But it's a reality of what we deal with.
Yeah.
The most helpful is the people that just, there's not an actual question. It's just the people that genuinely open the space for conversation, that do so with care and authenticity, and will ask a probing, appropriate question. And even if it's inappropriate, they're at least, if it's offensive is different, but, inappropriate in the sense of like, some people just don't know what to say, and they don't mean to be insensitive. But asking genuine questions for the opportunity for us to share our stories and to talk through these things is incredibly cathartic. And so I've really found, again, neighbors that live right next door to us that have 2 beautiful kids and have never gone through loss. They talk to us about loss all the time. and they ask about the podcast all the time, and they know like this is a part of our daily life, and they treat it like it's a part of our daily life. That not just raising Ashton, that's not our singular focus as parents. It's also the children that we don't have and that we didn't get to raise. And so I found the people that are really authentic about that, especially the people that haven't gone through loss. We expect it for us, the people that have, because it's, we're a part of this club, unfortunately. But it's the people that aren't a part of the club that actually want to understand and have conversations with you and be supportive. That means the world to me.
Yeah. Yeah. And it is really powerful when they, like, when someone actually wants to know, and they haven't gone through it, because this is something that people stay away from because it's just sad,
Indeed.
And I totally get what you're saying about not feeling like, am I allowed to be in this space? Like, can I, like, is my loss like valid? Like, is it less valid?
Is it traumatic enough? Right? Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, as far as I'm concerned, I'm a Christian, so I see, sperm, egg, baby, life. There you go. So any life lost is sad and
Agreed.
it's valid. And and I've had people come on and they've talked to me about embryo loss, and I'm like, yeah, that's a loss. That's the loss of a life.
Yep.
And they're like, oh, yeah, thank you. And I'm
and
like,
who's to judge? Right? Hey, who's to judge either way?
Yeah. I mean, if you don't feel like that's a loss, then that's up to you as well. But yeah, I think, if you feel like that's you know what's a loss,
Exactly right.
Feel it. And if you're asking yourself, oh, is it valid enough? Then it's valid, because you wouldn't be asking that question if it wasn't.
Good point. Good point.
But yeah, no, it gets me. Like, especially like chemical losses and things like that. I'm like, don't minimize yourself. Like, don't minimize that. It's awful. Like, going through this is horrible, and it's a loss. It's painful,
Yeah. We've had people on the pod that have lost, living children at months old. We've had a man that came on a couple of weeks ago that lost his child at 9 weeks and 6 days gestation. And I was saying, like, a lot of times, as we've mentioned, a lot of men don't necessarily feel that one as heavy. But if you listen to those two episodes, you're not going to find a ton of different emotion between the two. It's just as real. It's just as raw. It's just as heartbreaking. And so we're fortunate. Nobody wants to be in this club. I don't want any more members. Like, I would love if we were the last ones, right? There was never anybody else joining this shitty club. Wouldn't that be a wonderful world? The reality is there are going to be new people every minute, every hour, every day. But it is powerful once you're in it to see. I'm talking to you at 3 a.m. in Australia, by the way, for people that are watching. It is literally 3 a.m. in Perth, almost 4. Your commitment to doing this and the community that we now have. We have people in 30 different countries listening to our podcast. We've been around for 2 months. I never in a million years thought that people outside of Pennsylvania would listen. I just didn't even know like that was the reach we would have. We talk a lot about grief is global, and guys need this. And there is a power in this community. And there's a catharsis in talking and honoring our children. So I am so grateful for you and for the Joy of Sunflowers and for having me here. This has been an honor.
Thank you so much for joining me and talking about everything and sharing your experience. Is there anything that you wanted to leave on, like any final notes or anything for maybe someone who's in the throes of it right now? They haven't closed that door, or they're thinking about closing that door.
I'll talk to the guys, right? Because I think you probably got a lot of women listen and ladies to talk to your guy, right? Just like we talked about earlier.
I'm sure there's women who have been like, hey, honey, this is
get over here.
Man.
There's this bald American dude that you need to hear from. It's a little bit of what I started to say earlier, where we're in this space, whether you like it or not, and embracing these emotions. We as men often have to be the protector. We try to fix everything. We try to, keep our house working and the emotions in check. But the reality is if we don't deal with ourselves, the fact that as men, when we don't have control of certain things, or we can't make a situation change, our whole identity goes into flux, and we start to question what we're able to do for our family. And I think what I would welcome men to do is to embrace that emotion. The alternative, what most do and what I've done for a long time until recently, is push that down and pretend like it doesn't exist. And that's where these, difficult marriages and, the emotional explosions and the things that just sort of manifest in the wrong ways that we don't intend or want to be our reactions going through this. It's an inevitability if we don't embrace and talk about this part of our life. And through the sadness, you find some beauty in there, and you find an amazing community, and you find a great way to honor your children. And so I think my final thoughts to men is just embrace this space, embrace this portion of your life, because it is who you are. And don't deny that piece of who you are, because I think once you start to recognize the power in talking and the power of community, you're going to find a lot of power in healing too.
Yeah, that was really good. That was so powerful. And I like to add sometimes that when it comes to your partner, she wants to hear that. She wants to hear what you're, and that is cathartic to her. That's helpful for her. Every woman wants like the same thing, like their husband to cry with them and watch Netflix.
Yeah.
That doesn't always happen, and that's fine. Even different ways.
That's right.
But she probably wants you to open up to her. So
here will be, and I know you asked for my final thought, but I'm going to make a second one. Ladies, you got to lean into with your fellas. Right. I think that's a really important part. It's because we may not be doing everything the right way, guaranteed, but we don't grieve in the same ways. And to expect us as men to grieve in the same way you are is just as unrealistic for us to expect you to grieve in the same way that we are. And so there has to be a leaning in and coming to center, a recognition and an embracing of you grieve this way, I grieve that way, and that's okay. But I need to help you in that side of your space, and you need to help me in this side of my space. To expect you to come over into this side is an unrealistic expectation, and we're only going to harm ourselves. We're going to fight about things and trying to make moves that are just they're just not going to happen. So ladies, just as much as you want them, I watched The Bachelor last night with my wife and a bottle of wine. True fact. I kind of like it, so it's okay. But just as much as you want us doing those things with you, your man wants you to go to the game with you, and maybe there's a catharsis in that for him or something along those, and you might not see it just as much as he doesn't see the things that you wish he saw. So there's a lean in on both sides here to be a successful marriage, just like you lean in on every other component of your marriage and your relationship. If you're not married, your grief has to be the same. So I'll leave you with that.
No, thank you. Thank you for adding that. It's so true. And I think, a lot of women just are like, oh no, because I'm going through it too, but you have to, it's a relationship. You've got to,
that's right,
be on both sides. And so my husband and I, we've discussed a lot, and it's taken time to like accept that we're different in the way that we handle grief or that we handle loss. And it's once you start moving towards that, it makes it a lot easier, and there are less fights, there are less explosions, and yes,
or you at least understand the explosions. You're like, oh yep, that was a grief explosion, sorry about that. Right, you can put justification and thought behind them.
Yeah, like if your wife
Perfect.
is like overreacting about like something falling on the floor, or like maybe you have kids and one of them gets injured or something and she's freaking out. That's a lot of that is grief. Like
that's right.
I didn't really freak out about my kids hurting themselves that much before, and now I'm like terrified.
Oh, I'm totally with you on that. Totally with you on that.
It's insane. I don't know if you've got any more time. Do you need to go?
If you got one more pending, I've got a meeting in 15 minutes. So if you got one more burning question, I can take it.
Okay, just one more.
Sure.
With your son, has anything changed? I mean, obviously everything has changed. Like in terms of how you take care of him and how you like watch him, like, because I watched their breathing so much more than I ever did.
Oh yeah. I mean, we were at the emergency room on Saturday, and everything's fine. This is a true statement. Because he's been coughing for 6 months ever since he's getting in preschool, and that's why I'm coughing. And we were literally like, we can't deal with it anymore. Every doctor is telling us everything's okay. So we literally went to the emergency room on Saturday. Of course, exact same. Like, you're hypersensitive to every emotion or every scenario. You're walking in a parking lot and I'm holding his hand with like a vice grip type of thing, which of course every parent holds their child's hand going through a parking lot. Any good parent does that. But like in the back of your mind as a lost parent, like that grip is just percentages higher and harder every time, especially, knowing that Duchenne muscular dystrophy was a possibility. Every time he's not walking right, or he's, having a muscle issue or something along those lines, like it just puts us right back in those worries and concerns that we've had. He's our whole world. And so, yeah, we're hypersensitive on a lot of those types of things. But I also have to be really conscious of not projecting that insecurity of myself onto him. I want him to understand where, the challenges that we've had, like we talked about earlier, and to talk about Beckham and Ari, and, to understand what's, appropriate for his age. But I also don't want to project my insecurities or my worries or anxieties on him, because I think, we do that too much. There's negative ramifications of that. So it's a fine balance of being, cautious appropriately, while also just letting a kid be a kid. And you can't protect him from everything. And, it's a hard balance. And I know my wife struggles with it a lot too, just as I do, I'm sure. But they're pretty damn resilient too. Right. And we took him to the ER and he was literally fine. They gave him nothing. They did nothing. They're like, go home. It's midnight. And so he's like, what are we doing here, Dad? So I do struggle with that a lot, but I try to make sure that it's mitigated.
Yeah. No, I mean, see, he's been coughing for a while. I think it's okay. It's reasonable to take him to the ER. It's fine.
Yeah. 6 months. Literally, my wife just got home from a chiropractor appointment for him, because they're taking him to a chiropractor to try to figure out if there's some things that can be done there. We're doing everything we can to get rid of this damn cough. Yeah. But we're probably even more sensitive to it just being lost parents.
Yep. Yeah, definitely.
As I cough.
My sister had a cough for ages, actually, at one point, and she got diagnosed with like walking pneumonia. It was really weird. Like he literally
got diagnosed with walking pneumonia 2 weeks ago.
Oh my gosh.
I swear on my life, 2 weeks ago, walking pneumonia.
Yeah, well, she was coughing for it felt like a year, but I think she said about 6 months. And then it became strep, and now who knows where we're at. We'll see what the chiropractor said. Well, good luck.
Thank you.
I'll be praying for his health and that he feels better.
Thank you. He'll be fine.
Thank you so much for joining me. And
my pleasure.
Fine. He'll be fine. Yeah. But she's fine. She's like 26 now, but she didn't have a fun time while she was coughing, but it was like really bad.
Yep, I know that feeling. I know that sound.
Yeah. But
well, thank you.
Have a good day.
Bye. You too.
Bye.
Please note that all speakers, including experts and professionals, express information, views, and opinions that should not be used to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any medical conditions. If you have a medical issue, please consult a qualified professional. Speakers voice their own views, opinions, and conclusions, and they may not reflect the views, opinions, and conclusions of other speakers. Ella Rose, The Joy of Sunflowers, and its sponsors may not endorse all or any of the views, opinions, or conclusions expressed.